Before they were governors, best-selling authors, podcast giants, movie consultants, and television personalities, these men all came out of one of the most elite military communities in the world. Some became famous because of war. Others became famous because they turned that reputation into media, politics, books, or entertainment. And a few became so recognizable that millions of people know their names without ever realizing they were once Navy SEALs. So who are the most famous former Navy SEALs, and what exactly made each one matter? Let's rank them. At number 16 is Remi Adeleke. Remi Adeleke stands out because his story feels like a movie, even before Hollywood entered the picture. He is a former Navy SEAL who later became an actor, writer, and public speaker. Publicly, he's known more for redemption, transformation, and storytelling than for a single famous combat mission. His SEAL background is part of his appeal, but his real cultural impact comes from turning a rough early life into a compelling media identity. In the public imagination, Remi represents the former operator who becomes a modern inspirational figure. At number 15 is Craig Sawyer. Craig Sawyer became known as one of those highly visible tactical personalities who stayed in the public eye long after military service ended. Public biographies associate him with SEAL Team 1, and his service belongs more to the late Cold War and post-Cold War era than the better-known Iraq and Afghanistan generation. What made him notable was not one blockbuster mission. It was his ability to become a recognizable media-facing former operator through television, commentary, and advocacy. In a way, he helped shape the image of the tactical expert as public personality. At number 14 is Chuck Pfarrer. Chuck Pfarrer represents an earlier route to fame. He came from the SEAL world, with public associations including SEAL Team 4 and SEAL Team 6, and service linked to the Beirut era and Cold War special operations environment. But what made him famous was what came next. He went into books, screenwriting, and film production, helping translate the world of elite operations into entertainment. Long before podcasts turned former operators into brands, Pfarrer was already part of that pipeline from real missions to pop culture storytelling. At number 13 is Kaj Larsen. Kaj Larsen is unusual because he did not become famous through politics, self-help, or action movies. He became notable through journalism. A former SEAL officer publicly tied to post-9/11 service and later reserve work, Larsen crossed into mainstream reporting and documentary storytelling. That makes him different from most names on this list. He did not just talk about the military from the outside. He brought a military background into journalism itself, and that makes him one of the more unexpected former SEAL public figures. At number 12 is Richard Mack Machowicz. If you ever watched military television in the 2000s, chances are you remember Mack. A former SEAL publicly associated with SEAL Team 1 and SEAL Team 2, his service belonged to the late Cold War and post-Cold War period. But his real fame came from shows like Future Weapons and Deadliest Warrior. That is what made him memorable. He had just enough credibility, just enough intensity, and just enough on-camera presence to make military hardware feel exciting to mainstream audiences. Mack helped turn tactical fascination into television entertainment. At number 11 is Cade Courtley. Cade Courtley helped make the former Navy SEAL survival expert a recognizable TV format. Publicly identified as a former SEAL, he became best known for preparedness and disaster survival television. His fame did not come from a famous firefight or one defining war story. It came from repackaging military-style calm, planning, and toughness into something everyday viewers could relate to. In popular culture, he helped bridge the gap between elite military mystique and mainstream survival media. At number 10 is Jack Carr. Jack Carr is one of the clearest examples of a former SEAL who successfully built a major entertainment franchise. Publicly known as a former SEAL sniper and officer with service during the post-9/11 wars, including Iraq and Afghanistan, Carr later wrote The Terminal List and turned it into a hit screen property. That is what made him famous. He did not just write thrillers. He helped shape how mainstream audiences imagine the modern special operator. His work turned SEAL experience into a much bigger pop culture universe. At number 9 is David Goggins. David Goggins may be the most psychologically influential man on this list. publicly associated with SEAL Team 5 and SDV Team 1, with service during the post-9/11 era and ties to the Iraq War period. Goggins became famous less for one military mission and more for what he represented afterward: pain tolerance, endurance, discipline, mental toughness. He became a phenomenon because he transformed the Navy SEAL image into something bigger than combat. For millions of people, David Goggins is not just a former operator. He is a symbol of refusing to quit. At number 8 is Robert O'Neill. Robert O'Neill became famous because his name is publicly tied to one of the most dramatic counter-terror operations in modern history. Public sources associate him with SEAL Team 2, SEAL Team 4, and SEAL Team 6, and with post-9/11 missions including the Bin Laden raid, the Maersk, Alabama rescue era, and the broader war on terror. That alone would have made him notable. But what pushed him into lasting public fame was his willingness to speak publicly afterward. He became one of the most recognizable faces connected to the mystery and controversy surrounding SEAL Team 6. At number 7 is Chris Kyle. Chris Kyle became one of the most famous Navy SEALs ever because his story broke through into mainstream American life in a huge way. Publicly associated with SEAL Team 3 and the Iraq War, Kyle was already known in military circles for his sniper record and multiple deployments. But American Sniper changed everything. The book and the film turned him into a national symbol. To some, he represented battlefield skill and sacrifice. To others, he became part of a larger debate about war, myth, and memory. Either way, his cultural footprint became enormous. At number 6 is Marcus Luttrell. Marcus Luttrell's name became inseparable from Operation Red Wings. Publicly associated with SEAL Team 5, SEAL Team 10, and SDV Team 1, and tied most strongly to the war in Afghanistan, Luttrell became famous because Lone Survivor carried his experience into mass culture. That mattered. For many Americans, his story became one of the defining narratives of the post-9/11 wars. Small teams, brutal terrain, impossible odds, and extraordinary sacrifice. His public identity is built on survival, memory, and the emotional weight of that mission. At number 5 is Jocko Willink. Jocko Willink took combat credibility and turned it into one of the most successful leadership brands in America. Publicly linked to multiple SEAL teams and especially to Task Unit Bruiser under SEAL Team 3 during the Iraq War in Ramadi, Jocko already had a strong military reputation. But what made him famous far beyond military circles was how he translated combat lessons into civilian language: discipline, ownership, responsibility, execution. He became more than a former SEAL. He became a philosophy. And that made his influence much bigger than his service record alone. At number 4 is Shawn Ryan. Shawn Ryan represents the new media version of former Special Operations fame. Publicly associated with SEAL Team 2 and SEAL Team 8, and tied to the post-9/11 era including Iraq and Afghanistan, Ryan became notable not because of one best-selling war memoir, but because he built a platform. The Shawn Ryan Show turned him into a major voice in long-form digital media. Veterans, intelligence figures, politicians, and controversial public guests all helped make his platform bigger and bigger. In today's media landscape, that makes him one of the most relevant former SEALs alive. At number 3 is Dan Crenshaw. Dan Crenshaw is notable because he carried the modern Navy SEAL image directly into politics. Publicly associated with SEAL Team 3 and service in both Iraq and Afghanistan, Crenshaw was badly wounded in Afghanistan and later entered Congress. What made him famous was not just his resume. It was the fact that he became instantly recognizable to the public. The eye patch, the combat backstory, the media appearances, and the political profile all turned him into a national figure. He did not just become a veteran in office. He became one of the most recognizable former operators in American politics. At number 2 is Rudy Boesch. Rudy Boesch matters because he connects two very different worlds: the birth of the Navy SEALs and mainstream television fame. He came from the UDT era, became one of the original members of SEAL Team 2, and served in Vietnam. Historically, that already makes him important. But culturally, what made Rudy unforgettable was Survivor. Millions of viewers saw this older, incredibly tough, no-nonsense former frogman and instantly understood that he came from a harder generation. Rudy was not just a reality TV contestant. He was a living bridge to the earliest days of naval special warfare. And at number 1 is Jesse Ventura. Jesse Ventura is probably the most mainstream celebrity on this list. Public accounts tie him to UDT-12 and later Reserve-era association with SEAL Team 1 during the Vietnam-era military period. But what made Ventura famous had almost nothing to do with quiet professionalism. He became a pro wrestling star, a movie actor, a television personality, and then governor of Minnesota. That is an almost unbelievable jump. While other former SEALs became famous inside military culture, Ventura became famous across American culture itself. He is the clearest example here of a former Navy frogman turning into a full-blown public celebrity. And that is what makes this list so interesting. These men all came from the same broad world of naval special warfare, but they did not all take the same road out of it. Some became symbols of war. Some became symbols of toughness. Some became storytellers. Some became brands, and some became celebrities that the average viewer would recognize even without knowing a thing about the SEAL teams. If you enjoyed this video, drop a comment and tell me who should really be number 1. You're in the war room. Subscribe for the next briefing.